Before Nelson Mandela was released, before South Africa became independent, the monotony was simple. Africa is not independent until South Africa and Zimbabwe and other colonies were freed. We used to hear of walowezi wa Rhodesia and makaburu wa Afrika Kusini. That is everything that used to happen. South Africa had very good music, resistance and freedom songs. Freedom is coming tomorrow. That was Sarafina. Hugh Masekela, he was saying, free Nelson Mandela. I want to see him tomorrow walking around in Soweto holding with Winnie Mandela, something like that. It was very good music and whatever. But after independence, the oxygen was removed from the body. You never hear of South African songs again. Do you? Look at the most famous songs nowadays. Actually, today, I believe that Tanzania has better music than South Africa. You hardly hear of South African music nowadays. But those days, every concert, international concert especially, whenever a South African musician would go there, it would be very much cheered. And the music used to hit like a bang. It's a long story to talk about it. We will just concentrate on the last few days and especially just on Nelson Mandela. This is something that you can complete a whole month, each day having such a similar video for February 28th. From Kenya, there was a visit by President Frederick de Klerk of South Africa to Kenya in general and Eldoret in particular. In this very video channel, I have recorded the church he visited while I offered security. I was there by then still working with the NIS. So we boosted the secret service. Google says that he was born and brought out in South Africa. But when he visited the church in 1991, somewhere there, he said that the church, his grandfather was a pastor in that church. And he talked about being born and brought out in that area. There is an hospital, I think in a place called Plateau, within Eldoret, where Gladys Boschore was born. And de Klerk was also born in the same hospital. I remember recently Gladys Sholay upgraded that hospital because she was born in that hospital. I remember a preacher praying for him to pass through whatever he was going on. That is, de Klerk was going on. That was 1991. Because the preacher said that on one side, there were those people who were pushing de Klerk, saying that he was too fast in implementing changes. And on the other side, there are those who are pushing him, saying that he was too slow. So the preacher prayed for him to have the wisdom of God and the support of God to go through. Some things we used to hear, we could only see them on, we could see them, even though we saw them on black and white TV. We used to hear how Kenya used to be before independence. And it used to happen in South Africa, where we used to see them on black and white TV. Whenever I mention black and white TV, people talk of Great Wall. No. Great Wall occurred when I was employed. Great Wall TV. Me, I talk of TVs such as Bush. Bush was very common, and we had a black and white TV which was called Ferguson. Ferguson. So problems that they used to have in South Africa was that the government had decided to be teaching in Afrikaner language instead of English. Then there were separate seats in trains, buses, and even toilets. Those ones we used to see them on TV. So South Africans who are my age mates used to go through apartheid. Apartheid is an Afrikaner word which says apartness. Apartness. Each people be apart. Each people be apart. Africans be this part, uh, whites this part, Asian, and such and such. Just like Jomo Kenyatta, you see Jomo Kenyatta when he was jailed in Kapenguria, he was jailed for a misdemeanor. He was jailed for a misdemeanor. And misdemeanor in law is a small offense. But he spent more time in jail. Jomo Kenyatta spent 7. Uh, Nelson Mandela spent 27. Before independence, all South Africans, irrespective of his political party, agreed that Mandela should be the president. For example, if you belonged to Inkatha Freedom Party, you wanted South Africa to get independence, and Inkatha Freedom Party rules under Nelson Mandela. If you are a member of the Pan-African Congress, you wanted Mandela to be the president, but under Pan-African Congress. Of course, he obviously chose African National Congress. He chose the African National Congress. Not only was he a member of that, he was also a founding leader of the military wing of the ANC youth movement, which was called Omkhonto Wesizwe. Omkhonto Wesizwe. I hope I've pronounced like them. Omkhonto Wesizwe means the spear Wesizwe of the nation. So obviously, coming out, he would have obviously gone to ANC. He stayed long in Robben Island. This is a special island that was converted into a prison. Just like Kenyan, we can decide to take an island like Migingo and make it be a prison island. Of course, Robben Island was very big. You cannot even compare with, but it was just for a lack of a better, for example. Now, they used to break rocks there the whole day, and the reflection of the rock and the chipping of the rock soil affected his eyes forever. My daughter was born on Valentine's Day, 1990, 2 days after his release. Uh, a few, uh, a few, a few weeks or something, or even months before he was born, before he was released, the whole story used to go that Nelson Mandela is about to be released. So when Nelson Mandela was a few days before he was released, I used to tell the mother to my daughter that I would have wanted my child, either if it was to be a boy, he was to be called Nelson Mandela, not Mandela, Nelson Mandela. And if it was to be a girl, she was to be called Zinzi Mandela. I didn't want to call it Mandela because I wanted to remember that she was born in Mandela when Mandela was released. That's a poem. I didn't want to name my child Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela had become a thug that time. She used to have a team of thugs who used to pretend that it was a football team, but they used to kill people. There was a young boy who was killed by those Mandela FC, and people really hated her. So I didn't want her to be called Winnie Mandela, but I wanted her to be called Zinzi Mandela, the daughter of both Winnie and Nelson Mandela. But Mama Mtoto did not want. She insisted that I cannot name, if you don't have relatives whom you can name after. So we argued at the Mandela maternity. And when we argued, my daughter has two Christian names. Uh, the second name is Nanjeho. Nanjeho is actually Nanjeho is not a name. Nanjeho it means that somebody who brings joy, or it's joy. In short, it is joy. So that is why my daughter has two Christian names. Then it was around this time that Mandela was moved from, first of all, he was removed from the Robben Island prison. He was brought to another prison around Johannesburg. And instead of staying in cells, now he was staying in the commandant's residence. It's just like you being a prisoner in committee. And then the commandant of committee prison is told to move out of his residence, one of the prisoners to be staying in that house. Now you understand. Uh, those days, he used to be told by the clerk. First of all, it is good that the clerk took over that time, because before him there used to be Bother. There were two Bothers. There was Peak Bother. One was a foreign. I can't really recall the names, but one was a foreign affairs minister, and the other one was the prime minister, the president. And the Bothers were really bothering people, if I can say that. But it is good that he became the president, and otherwise South Africa would have gained independence much later. So that is how he stayed. When he was staying in a commandant's house of the committee of that country, he was being asked to 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 to, to, to sign an agreement for coming out to be free. But he was saying, how can I be free when the whole country is free? So when the whole country is free, then I'll be free. They cleared that. And one of the last public things that Robert Ouko did before he died, it is that the day that he was being released, that was on 10th February, Robert Ouko was watching the TV and saw him coming out, and he was very happy. I'm very sure that wherever Robert Ouko is, if he were to be asked, he would say something that he missed in the world, that he would have wanted to enjoy. I believe that what he misses most is if he were to overstay long, was to meet Mandela, especially when Mandela was free and even a president. When he came out of prison and the whole world stood still, then came his private life. Before I venture there, allow me to say that we all have private lives. And allow me also to say that on many occasions, our private lives are the opposite of our public lives. So don't just judge somebody that since he's very good, uh, and why is he that is a failure in his private life. You also have to appreciate the fact that being in prison and not bringing up his children, or heading his family, must have affected his private family. But the greatest problem he had was that it was his wife. She had agashugwa. She had agashugwa. Of course, there were questions. Now that he was out of jail after 27 years, what happens to the other man? The other man was a doctor, a medical doctor. There were only two ways out, both were losses. One way, she divorces Nelson Mandela and announces publicly her relationship with the doctor, or she does away with the doctor and return, but she couldn't do them both. It became so serious that since she was a very senior ANC fellow, and even in the government and the parliament, whenever she would go to her foreign trips, she used to insist that the government allocates uh, additional person who is that doctor. It reached even a stage, an extent where the three of them stayed in one house. Mm, you see, if you are prominent, there are some problems you don't want to talk. There are some problems you don't want to talk, but you see, it reaches a place where you can carry problems so much. It reaches a stage that he could not stomach it. Imagine he's in the bedroom, master bedroom. The doctor and Winnie Mandela are in the sitting room watching TV. When they switch off the TV, they both go to the other bedroom. I can't talk more than that. What many people don't know, and what many Kenyans don't know, is that just when South Africa was to get independence, there was a problem between Mandela and Buthelezi, Chief Buthelezi. It was like the handshake, but you see in Kenya we associate handshakes with one person. So it was a handshake like that one. Two Kenyans undertook to reconcile them. One was Professor Washington Okumu, a professor of law, and Justice Chesoni. They did that. Actually, if you read a lot of things, they refer to Professor Washington Okumu because he headed the two people. But Justice Zakayo Chesoni was the other person. There were two Kenyans who left there. What Mandela did, and many African presidents don't like, is to give up while still in office, while still popular. You see, there was no term limits or anything. And you see, he just became the president for one term only. The second term, he did not contest. And I believe in Africa, many presidents, they cannot allow to go out when they are still popular and whatever. Even those who go after the second term, if they have a belief that they are still popular, they would still want to go on and on and on. That is what he did. Buthelezi was the uncle to the Zulu king, who was called King Goodwill Zwelithini. Goodwill Zwelithini. Now, the Ugandan people may understand this more than Kenyans. So the Zulus have, even today, they still have a king of the same name, Goodwill Zwelithini, but the current Goodwill Zwelithini is a second eldest child of the king that I'm talking about. So, an uncle to the king who was there in the 80s and 90s was called Buthelezi. Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Now, when South Africa started this story of each province having its own government, KwaZulu Natal had its provincial government where Buthelezi was the prime minister. South Africa was looking for a plan where every province, every people would be taken to their province, and then these productive provinces end up for the Boers and the whites. But then freedom came, South Africa was united into one. Uh, and that is the plan that was there. And when it became one, there was a problem between Chief Buthelezi and Nelson Mandela before independence. Then there are these two Kenyans, uh, Professor Washington Okumu from Bondo. Yes, from Bondo. Bondo inakaa ni kama, anyway, let me not say. And Justice Chesoni went and talked to the two, and they reconciled the two. South Africa ended up with one president and two deputy presidents. And when it ended up with one president and two deputy presidents, whenever the president went out, one of the two presidents would act as the president. But there is a time when the two deputy presidents were out of the country, and Nelson Mandela was going out for an official duty. By then, they had a unity government. They had a unity government of all political parties. So when they had this unity government, uh, Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi was the Minister for Home Affairs. He was the Minister for Home Affairs. Uh, Minister for Home Affairs is different from Minister for Internal Affairs. For the millenniums and Gen Z, kindly understand that the Minister for Home Affairs is like the minister who coordinates the county councils and so on. So when the three were out of the country, Nelson Mandela wrote an executive order bestowing the temporary presidency to Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi for the period that the three would be away. How many African presidents can do that? How many presidents in Africa can take the leader of the opposition, his harshest critic, and his person who has given him hard time, to make him a temporary president even for an hour? You cannot imagine that. So Nelson Mandela, his nickname was Madiba. Nickname was Madiba, and he comes from what do you call? He came from a chieftain. Yeah, he came from a chieftain, just like somebody coming from the Kabaka family, or somebody coming from Nabongo family, or Lenana family, or Chief Mumi, Nabongo Mumi, I said, or Wayaki family, such and such a family. He came from that, but he gave up on his chieftaincy and undertook law. He was a lawyer by training. He is is among the greatest African sons and daughters to have ever lived. We salute you, Nelson Mandela. Continue resting in peace. The world, the continent, and even the country that you are from has benefited from you. We are proud of you. Viva Nelson Mandela. Viva ANC. Viva Azania. Azania is South Africa. Viva Africa. Viva the world. Viva mankind. Enough said.